Everybody's got to have that 50 cents. Hi everybody, Michelle Grigsby from Kansas City, and I am going to be talking to you about a story that's in our Think and Grow Rich book. And this book is really quickly becoming my Bible. I mean, besides reading the Bible and my scriptures, I always want to, be reading a motivational book, and I'm not ever going to stop reading this book because as I'm participating in the Think and Grow Rich calls, I'm learning that this book is the foundation. It is the preface to all the other motivational books that are out there. And sadly, a lot of people either skim through this book and don't get it, or they never read it at all. And what's interesting about this book is that there's a secret, and it comes in two parts. And, it's really funny hearing Paul and some other people talk, and on these calls when they talk about, some of them have read this book, a dozen times, and they're still trying to figure out exactly what that secret is. And it says, Napoleon Hill says that when you discover the secret is when you're going to find money, relationships, health, happiness, whatever it is that you desire will come in so much abundance in your life. You'll be wondering you'll be wondering how, where was it this whole time? It was just like right under your nose. And, it's really cool to know that there are people out there that are focused, that have a major definite purpose, and all they're doing is subscribing to the principles in this book. And so, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share with you a story from this book and kind of tell you what I think about it, and then give you maybe a personal story on how that maybe applies to my life. So if you've been watching any of my videos, I think what you're going to do is you're going to start hearing some more personal stories from me, because I've been through lots of trials, I've been through failures, I've had setbacks, and I've had successes too. And what's awesome about this is it reminds me of things that I've experienced in my life, and it's bringing back memories, and it's allowing me to kind of rely or go back on those memories and remember the feeling that I had that helps keep me driving forward or moving forward now. And the story I'm going to read to you, I'm going to read it straight from the book, it's the 50-cent lesson in persistence. And it's about D.A. Darby. R.U. Darby, sorry. R.U. Darby, who he's the man that was the young man that was in the 3 Feet from Gold story. And if you don't know that story, that's an amazing story, and I highly, highly recommend that you read about that story where he failed in this endeavor for trying to find gold. And anyway, this is years later. I'm just going to go ahead and read the story. Shortly after Mr. Darby received his degree from the University of Hard Knocks and had decided to profit by his experience in the gold mining business, he had the good fortune to be present on an occasion that proved to him that no does not necessarily mean no. One afternoon, he was helping his uncle grind wheat in an old-fashioned mill. The uncle operated a large farm on which a number of colored sharecrop farmers lived. Quietly, the door was opened, and a small colored child, the daughter of a tenant, walked in and took her place near the door. The uncle looked up, saw the child, and barked at her roughly. "What do you want?" Meekly, the child replied, My mammy may send her 50 cents. "I'll not do it," the uncle retorted. "Now run on home." "Yes, sir," the child replied, but she did not move. The uncle went ahead with his work, so busily engaged that he did not pay enough attention to the child to observe that she did not leave. When he looked up and saw her still standing there, he yelled at her, "I told you to go on home. Now go, or I'll take a switch to you." The little girl said, "Yes, sir," but she did not budge an inch. The uncle dropped a sack of grain he was about to pour into the mill hopper, picked up a barrel stave, and started toward the child with an expression on his face that indicated trouble. Darby held his breath. He was certain he was about to witness a murder. He knew his uncle had a fierce temper, and he knew that colored children were not supposed to defy white people in that part of the country. When the uncle reached the spot where the child was standing, Check this out. She quickly stepped forward with one step, looked up into the eyes, and screamed at the top of her shrill voice, "My mammy's got to have that 50 cents!" The uncle stopped, looked at her for a minute, then slowly laid the barrel stave on the floor, put his hand in his pocket, took out a $50, and gave it to her. The child took the money and slowly backed toward the door, never taking her eyes off the man whom she had just conquered. And after she had gone, the uncle sat down in a box and looked out the window into space for more than 10 minutes. He was wondering with awe over the whipping he had just taken. And Mr. Darby, too, was doing some thinking. This was the first time in all his experience that he had seen a colored child deliberately master an adult white person. How did she do it? What happened to his uncle that caused him to lose his fierceness and become as docile as a lamb? What strange power did this child use that made her master over her superior? These and other similar questions flashed into Darby's mind, but he did not find the answer until years later when he retold the story to me. All right, so that is such an interesting story, and I hope I didn't repel you by my dramatic, my dramatic analogy, or the way I said that. Anyway, and when I think of that story, I think of the two qualities that she had is this little girl had definite purpose. She knew what she wanted, and she was persistent, right? And so I'm trying to think of a time in my life. And also, if you really think about it, I mean, this little girl, that you aren't supposed to defy. Back in those days, she knew that she was going to either be severely beaten or, like D.A. Darby said, are you Darby? That, he thought he was about to witness a murder. And so if you think about it, I mean, this little girl was willing to die to get that 50 cents. Is that true? I mean, would you agree? And I'm just trying to think of a time when I've been persistent and, in my path of life and my career. And I'm thinking of, some times whenever I can think of a number of instances when I've been truly persistent. And what's really funny is growing up, I was always told that I was like my dad, and my dad's always been, pretty successful salesperson, and I always looked up to him, and I always wanted to have what he had in regards to, I don't know why, but my whole life I always said that I was going to be in sales like my dad. And so when I went to college, I majored in marketing and business administration, knowing that I was wanting to get a job in sales. And I made that decision that I was going to get a job at a Fortune 500 company. That was back then, this was the early 90s. And back then, that was my goal. And I was driven, and I remember nothing was going to stop me. And I made decisions on things to do to, I guess, build my resume, expand my bubble. And I wanted to, look good on paper so that when it came time for me to be presented in front of a Fortune 500 opportunity, I was going to get it. And what's really neat about that is that I think is a really good example of a time whenever I was so determined that I think I put myself where opportunities presented themselves. And I remember I ended up becoming an intern at AT&T, and it was the Global Services Division, which was their phone systems, where they sold phone systems to businesses. And I got a job as an intern while I was working, while I was going to school. And I was determined to do so good that they would have to hire me because I was so good at what I did. And I was determined, and I won every contest that they had. And when it came time for me to graduate, they offered me a job. And that's when they transferred me to St. Louis. And I ended up hating it because, I was 21 years old and I was away from my family, and I didn't really have any direction after that. And so that, I think, is another blog post altogether, because I can tell you stories after stories where I was determined to succeed at something, and it was when I felt like I knew I had that determination that I was able to get it. So I think that I'll use that as my example in today's post, where I knew I wanted to work for a Fortune 500 company, and I put myself in a position to where I would get it, and I got it. And then, of course, after I got it, I really didn't have any direction after that. And so, anyway, I'll expand on that in another blog post. But um, yeah, so I'm going to leave that with you. And I'm just curious what maybe you might have gotten out of that story. But I'm wondering what the secret is. Do you know what the secret is? I'm still learning. And, one thing I love about these mastermind calls is that, hearing people's stories. I mean, guys, check this out. I took 3.5 pages of notes I typed because people were contributing such good ideas. The ideas that Paul contributes, and then the people when we mastermind afterwards, stories and quotes and ideas are just so awesome. And I literally had to dial in to the replay again and just type this all out. It's so good. This gives me so much material to talk about. It's not even funny. And so I really implore you to think about getting onto these calls, because what it does is it helps you tap into resources that you didn't know you had. And I'm just going to leave that with you today. And I know this is kind of a long post, and I apologize. So if you made it through, I want you to know that I'm really proud of you. And you are so meant for greatness. You have no idea. And I hope that you stay on this journey with me and either like this comment or leave a comment or like it and share it if you feel like doing so. I really would appreciate that. And if you want to get in contact with me, my Facebook page is Internet Abundance, or just connect with me. I'd love to know that you watch this. So, all right, we'll talk to you later. Have a good one. Thanks.